My biggest curiosity, I think, from all of your Gong millions of recordings is what differentiates the top performers from bottom performers? Are there any insights that you've gleaned over all the research to show anything that stands out between those that are closing and those that aren't?
So that is a loaded question. We could probably spend, maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 days on it based on all of the different articles we pulled. But I will answer that specifically with kind of two recent topics that we took a look at early now in 2025. The first being talk ratio, right? And so this was actually a really interesting topic because what we found back in 2016 was the golden ratio of like top performing reps talked about 47% of the time and then let their customers or prospect talk about 53% of the time. And so all of the top performing data showed that that was like the golden ratio. The interesting thing was that 9 years later now, we were actually seeing that top performers were talking more often. So about 60% of the time they were the ones talking versus 40% of the time their customers talking. So the biggest nuance that we actually found versus top performing and bottom performing sellers is that 60% for top performers was very consistent. And so the top performing sellers are the most consistent in they have their script down, they have their discovery questions that they know work effectively to get to the pain points that their customers are trying to solve. What we then found is like, okay, let's look at the low performing cohort. And the talk time was all over the map, which means to tell me they're super reactive, right? And so if they get into a sales cycle or maybe on a first discovery call with a prospect and it's not going, as they expected, they kind of lose track of their script. Maybe they start asking like 20 questions, asking a bunch of questions that maybe aren't relevant or aren't pulling on the right threads to uncover that pain. So it becomes less predictable and they're all over the place. And so ultimately results to less quota attainment at the end of the day and lower win rates.
Amazing. You're right. I would have thought adapting to the customer would be more successful. You actually want to be talking 60% of the time and the customer speaking 40. That seems to be more successful than it was 9 years ago.
That's what the data tells us. And again, this is not like a handful of calls that we're analyzing. We're talking about tens of millions of calls. And so again, I was surprised by the data, but as we looked into it, it made sense. The other thing we took a look at it was the number of questions that folks are asking, right? And so yes, while it's important to get your prospect talking, I think it's important to ask them the right questions, again, to uncover that pain so that we can set them up with the appropriate solution and create successful next steps. And so we saw the average is anywhere between 15 to 20 questions, with that sweet spot being around 17 questions for a discovery call asked. Similar to what we saw for talk time, that stayed pretty consistent at around 16 to 17 for those top performers. Again, if we look at the low performing cohort, all over the map. Sometimes they were asking 4, sometimes they were asking upwards of 30 questions. And again, I don't know, I wouldn't want to be on a first call with a rep getting asked 30 questions that maybe some of them become yes, no answers. We start to get a little short with them as we get frustrated. Again, kind of TLDR is like top reps are consistent in their selling behaviors.
Yeah, I would not have guessed. The 17 questions, that kind of magic number, was that discovery questions only or all questions asked throughout, like small talk, etc.?
So some of those could have been flagged as potentially small talk. On the small talk subject, though, again, we think about potentially different sellers' behaviors, and we think probably the top reps are the ones that are really good at building and connecting and building that rapport with their sellers. We actually see that top performers have about 17% less small talk than their bottom performing peers.
Fascinating. Okay, so they're kind of diving right in. They're not chit-chatting at the beginning of the call.
Yeah, what we found is that I think the way we worded it in the research article is they get to value quicker, right? And so I don't know, maybe let's say 5-6 years ago, we weren't on back-to-back Zoom meetings every day. Maybe we were, if we were working remote, especially maybe looking for more of a connection. I know myself, if I look at my calendar for the rest of this afternoon on back-to-back Zoom meetings, and maybe we just want to get into the meat of the conversation. But yeah, so those top performers deliver value.
Interesting. That one I would not have guessed. That's fascinating. We actually had someone ask us to ask the question of if there's any correlation between the hard skills of selling and the soft skills of the relationship building as they correlate to top performers. And that almost seems like it's more towards the hard selling versus relationship building. Is there any other insights you guys have been able to gain
Yeah,
on that
I think
relationship
that's
building side?
yeah, absolutely. I think I would be careful to say that the EQ IQ balance is hard skills versus soft skills. I do think the best reps are those relationship builders. I would come at it from this angle, especially in this era of AI, so to speak, that we find ourselves in. I think the top reps today and for the foreseeable future are the ones that, one, which we already talked about, are maximizing that time that they're able to spend engaging with their customers. And to do that, what I think they'll need to do is actually spend less time on some of these, like what I would call hard or tactical skills of like prepping for a call, taking really good, robust notes. Like, I think AI is going to do a lot of these back end hard skills that, like, maybe 5 years ago we're onboarding a junior seller in their first sales role and like trying to get them to build these muscles of like best practices of like, how do you plan your day out? How do you prioritize what contacts you're reaching out to? What does a good cold email look like? What is a good cold? I think AI is going to shorten that ramp time for a lot of these junior sellers on those like tactical or technical behaviors. And those that set themselves apart in the next 2, 3, 4 years are going to be the ones that like nail these interactions or face to face or video conferences actually on the phone engaging with customers. And so, not sure if that totally answers the question that folks were asking on LinkedIn, but I think it is AI is going to make selling more human, if that makes sense, where we can maximize our time spent engaging with customers and the differences that we're able to show and the value that we're able to deliver on those calls or in those interactions is going to be the game changer, because everyone's going to be on the same playing field in terms of their preparation for the call, the notes they're taking, their outbound strategies, because AI, I think, is going to automate so much of that for us.
I believe it. Yeah. Yeah, that's really neat. And getting to what they want to do, getting to what they're good at, and less of what they don't like doing, like data entry, right?
Oh, people love updating serial numbers.
Yeah. Okay, well, this is incredible. So my takeaways from the top performers: being consistent both in terms of what they're saying, how much they're talking, that 60-40 split, how many questions they're asking throughout, and diving into value. Don't spend all your time chatting at the beginning.